Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, supporting the launch of the Urban Institute's Financial Wellbeing Data Hub. My name is Thea Guerin. I'm director of the Data Hub, and I will be your host for today's event. We are so glad that you could join us today to learn more about this exciting initiative. Before jumping into today's discussion, I'd like to begin with a few quick housekeeping items. This event is being recorded, and the recording will be posted online shortly after the discussion concludes. Speaker bios for our fantastic group of panelists can be found online at urban.org. We have enabled closed captioning for the event. If you would like to adjust those settings, you can do so with the show hide caption buttons on your screen. All participants are muted, but you can type your questions or comments into the Q&A chat box at any time, and we'll address the questions towards the end of the event. We would be grateful if you could take 1 to 2 minutes to complete a quick survey at the end of the event as well. And lastly, please feel free to engage with us online using the hashtag #LiveAtUrban. So with those housekeeping notes out of the way, I'd now like to turn it over to Sarah Rosen-Wortel, President of the Urban Institute, to share some opening remarks for this webinar. Sarah?
Thanks so much, Thea. And I should just say, we're so excited to have you leading this effort and your good work here. Really thrilled. And I get to the great pleasure and honor of being able to welcome and thank those of you who have joined us for a chance to learn about this new initiative, the Financial Wellbeing Data Hub. With ongoing inflation, historically high housing costs, and nearly 40 million people in the United States experiencing poverty, it's really important to understand how all people, no matter their zip code or background, could have more financial security. And as we look to sort of address that problem here at the Urban Institute, no surprise, we believe that data can contribute to finding answers. Specifically, if we look at the data of how people pay their bills, how they handle their spending, how they save for emergencies, how they manage their debt, how they build wealth for the future, and how they interact with financial technologies, all of which are dimensions of financial health, we hope that we can, those are all dimensions of financial health that we typically look at in isolation. We think that if we can look at them together, we can find new ideas and new solutions. The Data Hub is helping us bring together disparate data sources in one place to create a new data asset that we can query to provide more holistic understanding of people's financial well-being. And I want to credit one of the speakers who you're going to hear from in a few moments, our friend Hans Morris, who some years ago set Signa Mary and me aside and really challenged us to think about how we, for public purposes, try to bring data together and look at it in holistic ways, in the same way that people in the private sector, companies like Netflix and others, are thinking and finding insights about their customers. In other words, that researchers are so often looking at one data set and trying to find an understanding, and yet so many other parts of society are bringing data together and looking at a whole individual. And that challenge really was one of the things that started us down this journey. I also want to note huge credit to Urban's superb data science and research technology team, which in a similar way is working with researchers across Urban to use innovative data science techniques to bring together diverse databases or information that exists in diverse databases to get more holistic insights. Just one example, we are looking at our model and our understanding of tax, and those data sets don't include insights about the racial identity of the families, the tax units that exist in those data sites. But because we're beginning to try to bring that together with information that is in other data sets that do, we can find new insights about how the tax code can be advancing, or in some cases impairing and making harder our quest to achieve greater equity in this country. So it's really the intersection of great important questions and different aspects of data from different resources that we think is really going to help take what we can add to the conversation to a new level. The research at that Urban will be doing with this data hub will help stakeholders across the financial well-being ecosystem, including policymakers, regulators, financial service providers, nonprofit organizations, and employers. All, we hope, help to make decisions that better advance equity and improve people's financial lives. The Financial Wellbeing Data Hub, try saying that 5 times fast, builds upon decades of urban research on financial well-being and other topics, including housing, healthcare, education, and the safety net. And it's going to draw upon unique capabilities, including our deep subject matter expertise in those areas and in other areas like food and retirement and education, et cetera, over time, as well as our rigorous analytic capabilities. And as we're seeing today, the power to convene and connect people together so that we're solving problems that people are working on in real time and bringing to decision makers, helping decision makers to deploy evidence-based insights in order for their work to be effective in improving financial well-being. We see this work as being complementary to that of many other organizations who are also leading really important financial well-being research initiatives. And we hope to find ways to work together in partnership. And we see many of our peers in this field who are real innovators and whose insights we follow closely joined on our RSVP list today. And we thank them for their work and for their partnership with what's ahead. So before I turn it back to Thea, I want to just do a few moments of additional thanks. First, of course, to our funders, Intuit, Capital One, PNC Bank, Wells Fargo, and BMO Bank for their generous support of the Data Hub. I also want to thank members of the inaugural steering committee who've agreed to provide us strategic guidance on the initiative in the coming years. And finally, let me just acknowledge the team that has put this together. Thea Guerin, who you just heard from, Miranda Santillo, Nick Martire, and Jen Andre for their leadership of the Data Hub, and as well to Signa Mary, who has been dogged and persistent from the day she first got an inkling of what was possible here to bring the team together and bring the work together to make this possible. So let me turn it back to Thea, who's going to talk more about the project and just say my real appreciation to everyone who's helped us bring it together. Thanks, Thea.
Thank you, Sarah. Really helpful framing remarks to hear how the initiative came about and how it builds on certainly Urban's capabilities and the work of our peers. So for the next few minutes, I'd like to provide a brief overview of the initiative itself, of the Financial Wellbeing Data Hub. At its core, the Financial Wellbeing Data Hub will produce actionable, evidence-based insights to inform solutions that advance equity and improve households' financial security. On the next slide, you heard Sarah mention this concept of stakeholders across the financial well-being ecosystem who are increasingly seeking data-driven solutions to reduce inequities and improve the financial well-being of all Americans. When we say financial well-being ecosystem, and you'll hear us do so many times throughout this webinar, we are including policymakers and regulators, researchers and academics, financial service providers, including banks, credit unions, fintechs, and nonprofits, employers and businesses, as well as community members themselves. Each of these groups increasingly seeking in partnership and in collaboration with each other, these data-driven solutions to improve financial well-being. The good news for these many stakeholders is that the data to inform these solutions already exist. If you think about it, every day families interact with a host of institutions, products, and services to manage their financial lives. Each of these interactions generates data that could, in trusted hands, inform policies, programs, and products that support financial well-being. But the challenge is that these data sources are often fragmented in ways that make it impossible to see the whole picture of people's financial lives. And without this holistic understanding of people's financial situations, their behaviors, their attitudes, the larger context in which they make decisions, these stakeholders, these decision makers across the ecosystem cannot develop effective solutions to reduce inequities and to improve financial well-being. Said another way, fragmented data lead to fragmented solutions, some of which we've seen actually have exacerbated disparities, as was the case with certain pandemic era policies in recent years. So to address these challenges, the Urban Institute is launching the Financial Wellbeing Data Hub. The cornerstone of this initiative will be the development of a new data asset that provides a holistic understanding of people's financial well-being. In addition to developing the data asset, we will also leverage advanced analytics informed by cutting-edge data techniques to unlock new insights from the data. We will also embrace standards of excellence in community-engaged and equitable research methods, and we will engage stakeholders across this broader financial well-being ecosystem to ensure that our research complements existing research and policy efforts already underway. We are extremely grateful to our funders who have made this work possible. You just heard Sarah thank them, but I will thank them again. Intuit, Capital One, PNC, Wells Fargo, and BMO Bank. Thank you all for your generous support. So to construct the data asset that will again serve as this cornerstone of the initiative, we plan to draw upon a combination of established, proprietary, and original data sources. We'll begin with those public data sources. Those are the circles that you see highlighted on blue on this slide, sources such as those from the Federal Reserve, the Census, the IRS, as well as established but not public sources, thinking here specifically of Urban's unique data set from one of the 3 major credit bureaus. Then to address gaps in these data sets, we will establish partnerships with private entities, such as fintechs, alternative financial service providers, nonprofits, credit unions, and others to secure proprietary data that can shed additional light on how consumers manage their financial lives. And finally, we will draw upon original data sources, including surveys and qualitative data from interviews and focus groups, in recognition of the fact that not all important insights can be observed in administrative data sets. We will then work with data scientists across Urban to draw connections, to draw linkages between these data sets, potentially using analytical techniques such as data imputation, machine learning, consumer modeling, and micro simulations. In the short term, only Urban researchers and partners will have access to the data asset, but in the medium to long term, we hope to provide external researchers with access to this valuable resource we develop. As we build the data asset, we will draw upon a series of core principles to guide our efforts. Underlying all of our work is a commitment to responsible data use, careful data security, and the centering of data privacy. Because as many of the folks on this webinar know, disaggregated data, even if de-identified, presents privacy risks for individuals, especially when linking multiple sources. And so we plan to work with data privacy experts, both across Urban as well as external experts, to ensure that consumers' privacy is protected at all stages of the work. On top of that, we will then pursue key data partnerships and rigorous methodologies to bring together these disparate data sources in responsible and thoughtful ways. Only then can we drive impact in ways that are consumer-friendly and people-centric. We will then construct the data asset, or excuse me, as we construct the data asset, we will also be conducting original research, which will be informed by research questions across these 4 key pillars that you can see on this slide: products, people, places, and policies. And so this year, we will execute several research projects that align with these key pillars, including an evaluation of a new baby bonds program in Washington, D.C., a study of financial well-being and inclusion in rural communities, an analysis of the effects of occupational segregation amongst Black women in precarious work arrangements, and a study of the effects of state-level APR policies, interest rate policies, which will build upon recent research we released analyzing the effects of the 2015 Military Lending Act expansion. And we envision that the data sets and the research methodologies used in these individual research projects will both inform and be informed by the construction of the data asset. And so we want that work to be proceeding in parallel. A huge thank you to my many urban colleagues who are involved and who are leading these research projects, including Madeline Brown, Afranima Bu, Yipeng Su, Cassie Martinchek, and Brenna Braga. Of course, throughout this research, we plan to engage stakeholders, again, across this financial well-being ecosystem, including the groups that we highlighted on the earlier slide, in 3 primary ways, which you'll see on the next slide. Certainly as members of a steering committee who will advise the strategy development, the scoping, and the execution of the initiative. You heard Sarah thank these individuals. It's a great group of folks who have joined our inaugural steering committee. They are listed on our website. My colleague Miranda Santillo is dropping helpful links, including a link to the list of names for the steering committee. Encourage you to take a look at that. Then we will also engage subject matter experts on particular topics to advise specific research projects as needed. And finally, we will host regular in-person and virtual events to ensure that we are capturing diverse perspectives from across this wider ecosystem. So with that, let me go ahead and conclude the overview portion of this webinar so we can turn to our panel discussion. Please do continue to add questions that you have via the chat box. We can address them again during the audience Q&A at the end of the event. And now, without further ado, I am pleased to introduce, or I should say reintroduce, Signa Mary McKernan, Vice President of Labor, Human Services, and Population at Urban, who will serve as your moderator for our panel discussion. Thank you, Signa Mary.
Well, thank you, Thea. I'm thrilled to be here today moderating today's discussion with our esteemed panelists. And before introducing them, I just want to take a moment to thank Thea for her leadership of the Financial Wellbeing Data Hub. In partnership with Hans, who you'll hear from in just a moment, and Urban Institute's Next 50 Knowledge Lab participants, we started discussing this vision for this initiative back in 2018. But it wasn't until Thea joined the Urban Institute last spring that this broad vision became reality. So I can't tell you how great it feels to be sitting here with you all today. Thea developed a strategy, secured funding, and is now managing the execution of the initiative. I'm grateful for her leadership. And now let's turn to our panel discussion. It's an honor to have Kant Desai, Jesus Herrera, and Hans Morris joining us for today's event. And I'd like to ask all 4 of them to turn on their cameras and unmute. Each of them brings a unique perspective informed by their respective work to advance financial well-being, inclusion, and equity. So Kant Desai is a senior principal at Cities for Financial Empowerment Fund, where he focuses on policy, research, evaluation, and leveraging municipal engagement to improve the financial stability of low and moderate income households. Previously, he served as chief of policy for the Chicago City, where he developed and launched the city's first Office of Financial Inclusion. And we're grateful to Kant for serving as a member of the inaugural Financial Wellbeing Data Hub Steering Committee. Thank you. Jesus Herrera is CEO of Up Together, previously the Family Independence Initiative. And that's a national organization dedicated to changing policies, systems, and beliefs so that all people in the United States are seen for their strengths and are able to build power and drive their own economic and social mobility. Under Jesus's leadership, Up Together has grown its work and organizational capacity to expand to all 50 states and to Puerto Rico. Jesus is also a member of our inaugural Financial Wellbeing Data Hub Steering Committee, and we're very grateful for his support and leadership there. Hans Morris is managing partner of NICA Partners, a venture capital focusing on financial technology companies that that's invested in approximately 90 companies, including fintechs such as Affirm, Digit, and Propel. And prior to NICA, Hans held multiple positions in the financial services sector, including president of Visa and CFO for Citigroups. So with that, let's dive into our discussion. As you heard both Sarah and Thea share in their opening remarks, the Financial Wellbeing Data Hub will unlock new insights from consumer data. It's going to bring together disparate data sources to provide this holistic view of people's financial lives. And then we're going to use the insights to advance evidence-based solutions that stakeholders from across the financial well-being ecosystem can use to improve financial well-being for households. So my first question to our panelists is, why do you think a new initiative that advances solutions rooted in holistic understanding of people's financial lives is important for identifying solutions to advance equity and improve financial well-being? Hans, I'll start with you, and then I'll go to Kant and Jesus.
Okay, well, I will say it is very gratifying to see this all come together. You mentioned it's something I've thought about for a while. And the problem is data. There's lots of data there's credit data, there's lots of research data from think tanks and academics on credit and benefits distribution and on problems that different segments of society have, for example, for retirement and for meeting basic family needs or more broad objectives that they have. And we also know there's quite a bit of research that shows, and I think all kinds of companies now very focused on this, which is that financial wellness has a big impact on just their health, the health and ability of their employees to thrive, and that's essential to everybody. The problem is that the issues are complicated and the data is not in one place. So what we really would like to do is say, all right, can we take the US population or US households and segment it and understand what the differences are in terms of the income levels, but also expenses, what benefits they're receiving. Do they have access to healthcare, for example, Social Security, other types of public benefits? What liabilities do they have? And what's the nature of those liabilities? It's not, you just can't aggregate liabilities because they have very different behavioral characteristics. Some, like some secured assets, you could liabilities you can walk from if you want. But the dynamic is it's not a static relationship at all. And then savings and what other pension or other benefits might they have? Someone who has very secure pension plan, for example, and a reasonable amount of savings in a home that has a fair amount of equity in it might not need much additional income beyond that, depending on where they live. But again, that could vary quite a bit depending on the geographic area that they live in. So trying to get a picture of that requires not just pulling together lots of data, but I think it's important that it be complete, that it be very rigorous, that it be objective, and then importantly, that it be trusted. And I think just to give a little commercial to Urban Institute, I mean, that's why I felt strongly you're the right organization to do that, because you could easily see this being mishandled because it was not complete and it's not rigorous. You could come up with a lot of bad conclusions, but also that it be trusted because the data is sensitive and needs to be protected and analyzed in enough level of detail to understand some of these dynamics so you can come up with good products and good policy solutions, even at the local, both the federal and the state and the local level, but also not reach invidious conclusions. So that's what we're all seeking to do here.
Thank you. Turning to you next, Kant.
Yeah, thank you thank you all for having me and be part of this. I'm really excited about this data hub and its potential. I just want to step back and talk about why we at the CFE Fund find this effort so valuable. Data in particular is really at the root of what we call the municipal financial empowerment movement. And really the reason why is that it opened up people's eyes of what's really happening on the ground. And And so for us, having a foundation of data, anytime we engage a municipal government, helps tell the story of what's happening and ultimately be able, we use it to then make the case for why municipalities should be really invested and engaged in this type of work, because they have a rich picture of what's happening on the ground. And moreover, not only setting that foundation, being able to track progress and show that they're having impact and show the value of this work, why politically and this work matters, how it makes an impact on different people's lives, and that ultimately continuing to invest in this work to better people's lives in a efficient and impactful manner is the goal. And so we're really excited about the opportunity to have more data that that tells a richer picture, to be more tailored in how cities in particular can develop solutions that are that meet the needs that people really have, as opposed to a one-size-fits-all. And so I think having unique data sources can really open the politician's mind about what's possible and what will really make a difference in people's lives.
Okay, thank you. Yep, I'm hearing, good products and policy solutions from Hans, making the case and tracking progress. Jesus, what about from your perspective? Why do you think an initiative like this is important?
Thank you again, Mari, and really happy to be joining in this conversation. So at Up Together, we've been promoting sort of this general idea of what is missing, especially for those who are facing economic hardship, and have been engaging and learning from them directly around their assets, and talking about from a strength-based perspective, what is going well. And so I think this ties in greatly in being able to have that whole picture inside of our communities, especially for those who we are forced through policymaking, the negative stereotypes that exist around the working poor, as well as racist beliefs, right? To be able to choke these communities of meaningful investment, to always hide their assets, to hide their best, because if not, we will punish that, right? Or, the other ways to be able to demonstrate that oftentimes they have to wait quite some time to be able to gather some meaningful assets so that we can recognize them for those abilities. And so I think this is a great opportunity, both in being able to get that whole picture of it, lift the strengths and ability of these communities, and begin to really help shape the policies and practices, both in the private sector and in the public sector, how to better support the communities that we work with.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we think a lot about how there's savings penalties and, built into our systems and what effects those have on people. So very important. Okay, so we're seeing a need for this type of research, but of course, what we're attempting to do here is very challenging, or it would have been done before. So I'd like to hear from you what most excites you about our goal to bring together and draw these connections between public, proprietary, and qualitative data sets, but also what are the challenges that you might expect we're going to face, and how might we address some of those challenges? And maybe, Kanta, I'll start here with you in the municipal perspective.
Yeah, I think what excites me is the opportunity to be able to sort of draw connections between financial health and other sort of key indicators of overall financial stability. So thinking about housing and thinking about, other sort of, even health, but thinking about the intersections of people's finances and those other sort of critical factors in people's daily lives, being able to tell the story using data is really exciting. I think that the challenge is how you communicate and leverage that data to engage different audiences. And because a lot of times some of these topics, as Hans mentioned before, this is a complicated financial system. These are complicated products, they're complicated services, and to be able to sort of communicate in a way to critical stakeholders who are involved in developing programs and policies in a way that ultimately gets us towards progress is always going to be a challenge. And I think, for example, where, some of the exciting research that you were all doing, be able to sort of lift up what are the sort of critical insights that will help inform the debate will be a challenge, because for the most part, the people who are involved in policy making, particularly at the municipal level, are not, consumer finance experts, or are not, researchers. And so the ability to sort of engage out external audiences in a way that will ultimately lead to positive policy change is going to be the real challenge, but also a great opportunity.
Yeah, that's exactly why we partner with groups like CFE Fund. It's all of us working together. Jesus, how about from your, the person and community perspective? What do you think is exciting and also some of the challenges?
Yeah, I mean, from an exciting point of view, I think the opportunity to challenge a lot of those stereotypes and sort of and racist beliefs that have been built over time, as you built this data set, you'll be able to eliminate, I think, in ways that folks have been missing, and will be disruptive, but disruptive in a good way, right? As you get a better, accurate understanding of what has happened. I mean, through my own years of experience in this work, it's just incredible the amount of good that is happening in communities that we so often feel are needy or helpless, in spite of the systems that continuously choke them of any meaningful investment, for that matter. People are resilient, and I think that resiliency is going to come through as you begin to learn. On the other side, from a challenge perspective, and maybe to build a little bit on Kant's comments, is how to walk first before running, right? How to be able to test and engage these communities in a meaningful way that gives you good, accurate feedback to some of what these policy solutions can be. And I think I saw somebody in the comments talk about, like, what is the value of an earned income tax credit? I think that the guaranteed income movement in the country right now is demonstrating, right, what happens if you are to increase direct unrestricted investment in people's homes. And as a result, the momentum and the capabilities that they have then to build additional assets. And I love that. I think that there's huge evidence now that is able to support it. What are the additional then products as well as policies? How do we test those? How do we get good at it while also, again, keeping these communities at the center and really learning from them?
You, Hans, do you want to add on that from the business perspective?
Well, I think what I'm interested, the better you understand the problem, the more you can come up with products that could work. And really I think everyone would say that when well-designed products with good data that are well-regulated, particularly in financial services, can bring capital, lots of capital to people who need it. And so that's what we want to do. But if people don't really know what the impact is going to be, or don't really know what the problem is with precision, you can get products that don't fit and actually can provide, do a lot of damage. And I also want to point out that the problems are complicated, and they're not complicated to be tricky, but I like, here's a good one. If you say you got a school teacher who is having their second child, how much do they invest in childcare for that child? Or what school should you send? Should you move to a different school district? Like suppose a different school district has much better educational outcomes, but it's more expensive. Well, is that a good decision for you or not a good decision? And many of these issues, like what's the return on your investment as a family, it's completely opaque. And I don't think most people at the local level, someone in with the problem, I don't think they'd be very good at helping them answer the problem because it's complicated. So what we're trying to do is saying, let's try and analyze some of these things so it's really clear in all different segments. It's not, it could be very poor people, but it could also be just, middle-class people that could use some help sorting out some of these problems. They don't really get high quality advice.
We know that financial well-being, it goes up high up the income scale at different levels we see, especially when it comes to wealth. So just turning to the research itself, given what a complex and multifaceted issue financial well-being is, just like you're all saying, we could explore any number of research questions through this initiative. And you heard Thea already mention some of the critical research topics that we're starting with: small dollar credit, baby bonds, occupational segregation, and financial well-being in rural communities. Thinking about your own organization's missions and goals, what research, policy, practice, or business questions do you think would be particularly important to explore through the Data Hub? I'll let just you choose whoever wants to jump in first. Whoever
I'll
has
jump in
thoughts.
first and then let others. I think going back to this idea and understanding of what's being missed, right, and people's abilities and the strength that they bring, and I love Hans speaking, right, like the whole spectrum of our economic ladder, or axis in that matter, for that matter, right, like there's different ways to be able to really understand the unique perspective, and even to not have to do this in a cookie cutter way, right, but to really tailor the responses to the different folks in the stages of their lives. And so I generally think we've gone cookie cutter, especially for those facing economic hardship, in the sense of there's a general social contract that we have around the safety net, and it's built around, as you do better, then you get less. It's oftentimes about what we do for you rather than what you can do for yourself. And it forces, like I mentioned before, around hiding assets. And so I do, to me, it's like, well, what's the new social contract, right? Like, how do we think about mobility in that end? Because people are investing in themselves and finding ways to, through hard work, ingenuity, do better. We're missing it. So what are the levers that could really sustain it, so that as people do better, they don't slip back, right? Which is sort of the cycles that we continuously see in the bottom tiers of our economic ladder. And so that, to me, I think it's sort of like the big picture opportunity. If I were to go a little bit like on a day-to-day, those small financial products that can better stop penalizing people for lack of visibility and understanding of those strengths, as well as any catalyst really that really recognizes what asset building can mean to folks in the lower tiers of society, and really investing in those abilities as well.
I mean, I feel that poor people in general, they pay for lots of financial services which do not serve them well. So they have very expensive services, and actually looking at some of the data, one of the companies we've invested in is Propel, which helps about 6 million people on food stamps, and some of the research they did on how, you know, it's expensive for them to even get any access to credit, or to take advantage of services that are valuable. I think you could deliver things. I know you can deliver things at lower cost if you have real knowledge about the exact circumstances of how something is going to be used. And I think what I'd hope we could come out, I hope 5 years from now, what we'll say is this led to some really acute insights about what different segments need, how we can develop some simple products that help address a complex situation. And I think someone else asked about in the chat about what about very low income people who are unbanked and conduct financial services, bill payments by cash? Can we get that data? And I would say, yeah, that data about all kinds of segments exists. And I think that is another thing that we should make clear. The data's there. It's pulling it together in a complete and rigorous and trusted way so that we're sure that it's going to be used properly, which I think it can be.
And I'll just add, that's a challenging question for us, because I think we have lots of questions we would love Urban Institute to help answer. But for example, just as what Hans was just talking about in terms of, how, the unbanked population operates, and, the what happens when, or potentially when, people get banked in a product that meets their needs, being able to help tell that story of what happens when you get banked in the right way, with a product that is actually aligned with where you are in your life, is one critical question. And another one that I think has been underexplored, and would love to sort of think about how this effort could help talk about this, is connecting the work around building financial stability with the other side of the equation. And something that we care about a lot is around consumer protection, and thinking about what are the characteristics of different people's situations that make them vulnerable to consumer protection concerns, where it could be that there are people who, it's true that there are people who have pretty stable jobs and a pretty seemingly a stable financial situation, but are actually still vulnerable to certain types of consumer financial protection issues. And I can think about, student loan related issues, or other kinds of products that may purport to help people, but are actually not helping people. And so trying to characterize some of the connections between the uniqueness of this complex financial life that people have and their potential vulnerability to consumer protection would be something I would love to see be explored.
Oh, great. So these are all great ideas, from products that actually work for people, to telling the stories about when the products work for people, and then the myth busting that's so needed in the field too. So this is great. We're going to include these ideas in our running list of topics to explore. And of course, Urban Institute is just one player in a broad universe of critical stakeholders who are all working together to improve financial well-being. And we're currently using a robust stakeholder engagement plan, and we'd want to be it'd be grateful to hear from each of you as we're building out that stakeholder engagement plan. Which groups of stakeholders are across this financial well-being ecosystem do you think would be particularly helpful to engage in this work? And how have you successfully engaged these groups in the past? And how do we thoughtfully engage with them? Jesus, I see you nodding.
Yeah, for us, so we have this unique opportunity, right, to continuously learn directly from the communities that we work with. And so they're driving our knowledge base to the point that, both structured and unstructured data is oftentimes overwhelming, right? But in a good way, again, because once people are treated and engaged in this way of saying, like, hey, show us your best, like, show us what's going on, not because we want to punish you, not because we want to necessarily or unintentionally derail some of those efforts, and but because we want to celebrate and actually want to get others to act similarly. And I think when you do that, and you begin to promote these ideas, that they really should be at the driver's seat of being able to help us understand who they are, what's going on in their lives, and how to better support them. I think that changes. And so, like, being able to do member centered or community membership centered surveys, as well as focus groups, and really tease out a true understanding from their perspective as to what's happening. And I just feel like that will be of enormous benefit in the long run.
I'll add, all of that is exactly kind of where we've been thinking, is that it's so valuable to hear from people directly, that in terms of what ultimately, how you form programs or how you design products, like there's a lot of insights from consumers of a variety of sorts that really can help design both solutions that you wouldn't think about. In particular, I'm just thinking back about some research that we did around banking access in different communities that we commissioned some focus group work, and thinking about their experience of people who are unbanked, and what are some of the sort of barriers to them thinking about engaging. And it really varied depending on who you were talking to. Some of it was people certainly had past bad experiences with overdraft, and to be able to sort of talk about how there are now products that, the financial system is moving away from overdraft because they know that it's just penalizing people for being poor, to what would motivate people to engage in a continually positive banking relationship. Well, people care about they don't care about banks per se, but they care about building assets and building, things that they really want to achieve, or getting things that they really want to achieve, and be able to sort of think about that from that perspective and designing products with with customers who don't normally get engaged has been super valuable. And I will say that that's actually valuable, not just with products and services, but also even thinking about policies, like how you design policies will ultimately be more valuable and impactful if you understand how people intersect with those policies in a real way. And I think, the municipal fines and fees reform work has really been a really illuminating effort of ways that people experience issues that you wouldn't otherwise have thought about.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good example of why it's valuable to engage with people directly and how their lives are intersecting with programs and policies.
Yeah, I like that, because there's surveys that provide, like the FDIC is unbanked and underbanked, that provide some of the survey reasons why people don't have bank accounts, but actually talking to people and talking to communities and digging deeper and getting those. I think that's right. Hans, any stakeholders you want to add in that we should focus on before we jump into the Q&A?
Yeah, I think what you really want, to me, ideally, it's not that surveys are bad, but surveys can be very unreliable. And so you don't get great answers. I'll give you one example that in student loans there are existing public service forgiveness, income-based repayment are both powerful programs. They're not used as much as they should be. So what's the behavioral reason for that? And one thing you'll see survey data, for example, about the people who have not completed, don't have a college degree, but have student debt, also don't participate in retirement plans and other savings programs. And that's survey related, but I'd love to see real data, like what's actually going on here. And absent real data, people are just guessing, and I think you get really sloppy, both policy answers, but also you're not getting products that really help people. We know behavioral finance is a real thing. I think there's 4 Nobel Prizes awarded in this. So people consistently don't do things that they should be doing. How can we design products to help them make better choices? That's the root of our.
Okay, well, thank you. Let's just turn to some of the audience Q&A now. And, Hans addressed this question slightly, but I'd like to turn to the rest of the panelists. And one of the questions was that, credit is the ultimate enemy of poor and low income people. If you don't have existing credit, or you have a poor credit score, especially in communities of color, for example, then you're often left out. And similarly, those without access to banking or mainstream financial products or retirement programs or employers, who sponsor savings plans. These are people who face particular financial challenges. So there's it's difficult to capture. How can the hub capture the reality of these populations? And how can this data then help drive solutions for those who have credit challenges?
I can start. The question is a challenging one, because credit is a tool that can help build wealth and stability, but it's also, as we know, can be a challenge for many communities. And so understanding some of the details and nuances by engaging with people and understanding what is at the core of, people's issues. For example, you could be in a community where, like there's no opportunities to build credit, or the idea of establishing a credit profile is just not part of, their world. And so then all of a sudden you're feeling the negative effects of it. You can understand why people might feel like this is a problematic system that just is hurting me because I'm outside the system. And so understanding some of the nuances of it through data, and to tell the story of, well, how is it negatively affecting people? You've started to see some change in the credit system. For example, the idea of building credit through rental payments has been a good change, and now becoming sort of part of the mainstream. Similarly, the idea of reducing the effect of medical debt on your credit score is a good change, because the reality is that there are people who take on medical debt and it's excessive because healthcare is expensive. It shouldn't be penalized. You shouldn't be penalized for a huge medical bill that there's no possibility to be able to pay, at least on being able to live do other things in your financial life. And so I think there's a couple of good examples of being able to tell that story through data, where it then starts to move the wheel of change.
Yeah, I'll add, and I think that's right. I think that the sort of in the horizon, the movement around alternative credit scores and really finding better ways to understand the value that exists inside of these communities, because they are valuable. And I think to lead with that statement is always important, that just because you are lacking of financial means and or formal ways to be able to demonstrate that the value that exists in your community and in your own household doesn't mean that you're not valuable. And that's a really important, I think, understanding that has to be brought on. But then let me maybe push that a little further out and just say, in general, the understanding here, though, is that financial systems have been built on a number of racist beliefs that have specifically targeted, and we see on the data, disappropriately, a representation of BIPOC communities as a result of those practices. And so I sort of almost think about a parallel around the SAT scores, which is to say that people have acknowledged it's not a good tool to be able to judge whether or not people have the ability to attend college, right? For that matter, as a measure, and because it specifically puts communities, BIPOC communities specifically, at a disadvantage through those standardized testing. And so many colleges and universities are just abandoning them as a requirement. And I would say the same thing around a credit score. It's not a good tool to be able to really accurately judge. So I'll go on the other side and say, then what is the right tool? Why don't we start thinking and rebuilding based on our true understanding of these communities and their abilities? What is a better measure to be able to continuously invest in them?
Just to stick with you for a moment, Jesus, looking at another question that came in, and that is, what's the role of social work in integrating financial well-being as a core component of social work practice? And how does childcare fit in with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. First is that anybody who's doing community work, who's involved and engaging and learning, I think that they have an ability also to be able to help lift and understand what is truly, again, happening, because there is this distortion that continuously has been put inside of these communities. Childcare is a great example of that. I think mentioning medical debt too. There are certain levers in our society that we can begin to demonstrate love and care for one another, and being able to create an ability for people to easily access those supports is important, and it would have a huge impact in people's financial well-being as well.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And then just I would like to bring Thea back in and all the panelists together. There's a question in the chat about how will you address possible gaps in the data samples for certain groups, such as people with very low income, people who don't have bank accounts, and conduct many of their financial transactions through bill payments by cash or offline, and maybe they have fewer transactions. Also, the questioner was also wondering how we'll manage efforts to obtain proprietary data if certain groups or organizations decline to share their data.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing me back in. The panelists began to speak about this a couple minutes ago, but I wanted to chime in to say that, there are indeed real gaps, real challenges in some of these large administrative data sets. Jesus and the others mentioned some of these. And so that's why we feel that bringing in some of these more outside, what we're calling the proprietary data sources, certainly from fintechs, but also nonprofits, Propel, who Hans mentioned, is a great example of a fintech that has a wealth of data regarding usage of SNAP benefits, EBT cards, that is never going to show up in some of these more, traditional data sets. And so that's why, we are talking to dozens of these companies, of these, again, organizations, fintechs, et cetera, to try to secure those additional data sets. But beyond simply the administrative data sets, I do think it's important to recognize that there are going to be some insights, some behaviors, some realities and situations that are never going to show up in the data. And so as much as we are calling this the Financial Wellbeing Data Hub, as much as we are talking about bringing together these existing data sets, that's why the qualitative data, the insights from the surveys and the focus groups will be so important to include in this conversation as well. I'm eyeing the clock. We have just a few minutes left. I want to see if any of the panelists want to get in on that last question. Otherwise, I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative back and wrap us up with a few final remarks.
I was just going to make one final point about data, which is in credit, which is really what I think. First of all, credit can mess up all levels of income. People make stupid decisions about credit at all levels. And then second thing is what we really want to help people understand is what's the ROI. Does it make sense for you to borrow for this? That's a really good thing to do because it's going to improve outcomes for you and your family. That analysis is not really core to the way a lot of people approach it, and it should be. So that's something I really hope we can help people understand much better.
Absolutely. So with that, before thanking our panelists, I want to acknowledge the wonderful participation from our audience. We received many, many questions, really thoughtful questions. We were only able to answer a fraction of these, but we'll be following up with each of you offline. Many of the questions are about how we plan to connect the data sources, the data that we plan to use, where we go from here. These are all things that we will figure out in the coming weeks and months. Would really encourage you all to subscribe for updates. I'll leave you with a few to-dos in just a moment so that, again, we can provide answers to some of these questions about where we go from here. With that, huge thank you to our wonderful panelists, Kant, Jesus, and Hans, and to our fantastic moderator, Signa Mary. Thank you all. With our final minute, I would like to leave you all with a couple of ways that, again, you can stay engaged with this project. So first and foremost, I would encourage you to review both released and forthcoming research, including the recently released Military Lending Act publication that we just released. Again, my colleague Miranda will be posting some helpful links into the chat in just a moment. Would encourage you to subscribe for updates to Urban's ongoing newsletter to stay informed of hub activities, other relevant research from Urban Institute. Would encourage you to continue joining the conversation by attending our upcoming events. These will be held both in person and virtually in the coming years. And then to also think about how your organization, your company might be able to contribute some of this consumer data to the data asset. Please reach out to me directly, tgarin@urban.org, to discuss. And if you do come from an organization who has funding capabilities, if you are interested in contributing financial support to the initiative, would encourage you to get in touch with me as well. So with that, thank you all for your time. Really appreciated your engagement today, and looking forward to staying in touch as we collectively build this exciting initiative. Thank you and have a good one.
Thank you, Thea.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.